All right, y'all. So one thing that we had hoped to be able to talk to you about today was what will basically be your final project in this class. And that is a group presentation that you will give on a tech company. And those assignments were listed in the email that's attached to this video. So if you would go ahead and maybe open up Canvas and you can kind of see what I'm talking about as I'm discussing them, you can find these assignments in the assignments tab. And there's really two assignments because this is really kind of a two-parter situation. So your group will be responsible for turning in two things, both a synthesis matrix that's due here in a couple weeks on November 12th, and a group presentation that your group will give during the first week of December, which is like our last week of class. So they're really kind of assignments that build upon each other. So I'm actually going to talk about what the group presentation is before I sort of explain the synthesis matrix part, which is actually due sooner. So I'm going to go ahead and open up that group presentation. And so basically your research presentation is going to be about the tech company that you've been assigned and some things that we want sort of in this presentation. Ultimately, this presentation is really kind of about how that tech company mediates information and sort of the information that its users see and receive. But there's some things that we want you to include in your presentation sort of beyond that. This will be something that your group will give during our regular class meeting period time during that first week of December. It'll be a Zoom presentation that your group will do. I would recommend that you guys probably want to do Google Slides or something like that for that. So one of the first things that we're going to ask you to include are things like background information. We don't necessarily want this section to be particularly long, but it would be helpful to get the whole class kind of on the same page as far as like who the key players are, what companies they own. So for example, Amazon owns Amazon Web Services and hosts a lot of the internet. I don't think a lot of people know that. So things like that, how much money it makes, all that kind of information, we'd like you to include like maybe on one or two slides at the beginning of your presentation. And then the bulk of your presentation for your group is really going to consist of the next couple sections. So the first one is really, probably should be the largest section, and it's really on how your company mediates information and any kind of criticism and controversy around the way that they do that. So some of the things that we've been talking about in this class. So the first question is going to be like, how does your tech company mediate information in the sense of like, Google mediates information through its algorithm and it decides sort of what your results are going to be and it decides what ads you see and like whatever. So that's actually a pretty basic question. It doesn't need a ton of detail, but just sort of like what the main components are and the main things that facilitate the way that that company influences the information that we all get. Then we'd like to hear about what the company does well. So I think in my example that you'll see on the synthesis matrix assignment is Netflix. So I might include a couple things that Netflix does really well. Mainly, we don't want it to be an entire negativity train, even though there's a lot of things to critique. But then we pretty much want you to move into some of the things that we've kind of been dealing with all semester. So what are some of the main criticisms or controversies around the way that your company mediates information? And so we do want this to be information focused because that's sort of the specialty that we're really looking at. As interesting as it would be to talk about how Amazon impacts the economy and small businesses and how they treat their workers. And there's so much stuff that we could talk about with some of these tech companies, but we really want to focus on how they influence the information that we receive, the media that we receive, whether it's the web or it's books or anything like that. So choose 3 or 4. This is something we'd like your group to kind of decide upon early on. Wikipedia even has some pretty great pages on like common criticisms of Google that could certainly at least get you started, but I wouldn't necessarily like stop there. You're certainly welcome to bring in anything that we've talked about in class, and that would also be completely appropriate. And then of course this is kind of a researched presentation, right? So we do want you to bring in what the researchers had to say about all those different areas of controversy or criticism, and that's sort of where the synthesis matrix piece will come in. So we'll come back and talk about that in a moment. We also want you to have a section that I just kind of called solutions, conclusions, and future directions. So there's some questions here that we'd like you to delve into, like what has the company done to address the issue? Has it helped? Is it even possible at all for the company to solve the issue? Is it maybe a societal problem that's larger than the company itself? Or is that maybe just an excuse and they really could do some things about it, but they're choosing not to? I mean, I think there's a lot to kind of pick apart there. And then what we really want to hear is your group's opinion, of course informed by the research, but again, just kind of the opinion that you guys come to collectively about how much we could count on the companies to self-regulate, how much they should self-regulate, and then what you think the government should maybe be doing to step in terms of regulation, and then also what kind of responsibilities and what role you think that we have as individuals when we're interacting with these particular companies and their products and services. If you keep kind of scrolling, I've got a point breakdown. I certainly recommend that you read through all of that so you kind of understand what you're being graded on. Okay, so all of that will be in your presentation. That's a lot, and so what we've done is we've kind of broken this up into 2 steps. So collectively, all of this is worth 200 points. The presentation itself is worth 120, but then your group will also be turning in a couple weeks prior to your presentation a synthesis matrix. And so if you want to go back and click on those instructions, and then we'll talk a little bit about what that is. I actually last night put together an example, like a very bare bones starter example of what this might look like. And so you might be asking, like, what is a synthesis matrix? It's basically just like a glorified spreadsheet that basically has all of your group's research and all of your sources that you have found. And it kind of helps you identify like areas of consensus or areas of disagreement and like where all of your sources kind of fit together across several different themes. I think we want your synthesis matrix to have 9 sources, so I didn't actually finish this last night because I don't know, I just had other things to do. But I kind of wanted to give you an idea of what it might look like. So I chose Netflix because that's not a company that anyone is doing. And I just kind of did, honestly, some basic kind of background research just from Google and Wikipedia. And like I did some like a quick library search and a quick Google Scholar search. And I probably spent like 20 or 30 minutes doing that. And I absolutely recommend that your group do the same thing as well. And I just kind of did that to get a feel for like what are some of the both scholarly and cultural conversations kind of happening around Netflix and the way that they mediate the information that we receive through their platform. So whether it's their algorithm or the types of shows they offer, like how are they kind of influencing what kind of information we receive. What I kind of settled upon are over here on the left-hand side. I've got some themes. So one is around irresponsible content, one is around algorithms, one is around impact on marginalized groups, one is around censorship. And so you guys need to pick in your group 3 or 4 themes that you kind of want to talk about in relation to your company. Just make sure that they're information focused. And then I also put together some other themes over on the side that kind of correlate to the things that we're asking you to do in your presentation. So there's a section that I called Conclusions, Solutions, Future Directions. I might expand that later into more than one theme. You can see I kind of went ahead and started building a theme just called Commentary with my own thoughts down on the bottom. Towards the top, I also started a theme around background information and what it does well. And then basically every time I come across an article or a book or whatever that tells me something that Netflix is doing well, I pull that out and I place it into its appropriate spot, right? So I've got all my sources listed here across the top, and then every time that source addresses this particular theme, I kind of pull it out and talk about it. You might notice that I include page numbers here if I have them, so that's something that we want you to do. And then I also tried not to quote too much. I really tried to use more summary of my own thoughts and my own explanation on what these articles were really saying. And then you can kind of see how later when I would maybe go to create my presentation, now I've kind of got all my evidence here kind of waiting for me. It's going to make it a little bit easier to pull my presentation together when it's time to do that and to make sure that I'm integrating all of the research that I need to be integrating. So in terms of what we're looking for with that synthesis matrix, like I said, we want you to have at least 9 sources. You may end up adding some later when you get to your presentation. We want 4 of them to be peer-reviewed scholarly articles. We want at least 1 book or ebook, and then you can choose 4 sources of your choice. We really do want to limit you to only use one website, and we really want you to use that one wisely. So you might notice the website that I chose was about diversity on Netflix. If we had talked about Wikipedia today, we would have talked a little bit about how people from marginalized or underrepresented groups have been kind of excluded historically on a systematic level from publishing secondary scholarly research. And that's changing slowly but surely, but it's not really to where it needs to be. And so when I chose a website, I specifically chose something that would be about diversity that might really be lacking from the scholarly record, but that I felt was really still important to include within the conversation. I think in the paper, a lot of us were using like New York Times or Washington Post articles, and all of those are available in the library databases. So make sure that if you're going to pick magazine and newspaper articles, that those are sourced from library databases, not from the website themselves. Then we want you to organize your sources, kind of like I mentioned. I would like to see them in chronological order because that will help you kind of see how the scholarly conversation has changed over time on your tech company. Below each source, I'd like a quick summary written in your own words about what that source is about. Then, as I mentioned, you'll put together your key themes, and then you will select content to put in the themes. You'll notice I don't necessarily have every box filled. That said, for each theme that you have, with 9 sources, I would like to see at least 3 or 4 boxes filled for each theme, if not more. My kind of go-to recommendation for a synthesis matrix is somewhere around 50% of the cells filled out on the spreadsheet. As far as what you want to write in those spaces, this is going to all kind of lead back to your group presentation. So think about what's going to be helpful for you when you sort of go to present on the major criticisms and controversies surrounding how that company mediates information, what some of the solutions might be, what your group's opinions are. So really kind of pull out that particular content. Again, it's okay to quote some, but we really do want to see you summarize a little bit more and quote a little bit less. Like I mentioned, I do have an example of a tech company that's only half complete. I have a non-tech company example that's fully complete, so you can kind of see what that might look like when it's fully complete, even if it's not a tech company. And then I also have a blank template for your group to use. To use that, you just go up to File, make a copy, and then you'll want to share it with your group mates. So one of you will make it and then share it with the 2 other people in your group so you all have access to it. And then how the grades are going to work for this assignment are listed below. And I think I mentioned this in the email. We would like you to go ahead and get in an email chain with your group members and try to meet before Tuesday if you can. We'd like to at least see you guys do kind of what I would consider to be the background information portion of this before class on Tuesday. So you don't necessarily have to find any sources yet, but if you want to get together with your group, do some kind of pre-research or some background research on what you think some of the main kind of issues and controversies might be around your company, and kind of decide on some of those at minimum before our next class. That's really what we would like to see. If you have any questions about this assignment, let me know.